Hi everyone, welcome to the best water-wise plants and grass types. My name is Catherine Moravec and I work as a Senior Water Conservation Specialist at Colorado Springs Utilities. A little bit more about me. I'm originally from the Denver area. I have a bachelor's degree in biology from CU Boulder, and then I earned a master's degree in horticulture from UC Davis in California. I've worked in the landscaping industry for over 20 years, and I've worked at Colorado Springs Utilities for 12 years. And I'm really excited to be able to share with you some of the types of plants that thrive here in Colorado Springs and use water wisely. So here's what I'm going to cover in this webinar. First of all, I'm going to talk about what are the characteristics of plants that grow well here in the Pikes Peak region. Then I'll share with you some specific plants that are tried and true options. We'll then move on to very low water selections. And then I'll talk about long flowering plants that bloom throughout the summer. I'll share with you some of our most promising experimental options from the WaterWise demonstration garden. And then I'll finish with talking about some low maintenance plants that might be great additions to your yard. So let's start off with what types of plants grow well here in the Colorado Springs area. If you are from a wetter part of the country that has a milder climate, it can be challenging to figure out how to get anything to grow here in the Pikes Peak region. Believe me, it is possible, but here are 3 things that you want to take into consideration when you're choosing plants. First of all, you want to make sure that you're choosing the toughest plants that have the ability to withstand wind, drought, snowstorms, frost, thunderstorms, and hail. And while that seems like that list of weather events would eliminate almost all the options, there are plenty of plants that can be knocked back temporarily and then thrive as they recover. So there are lots of plants that can withstand these weather events. But there are some that just don't, and we want to stay away from those more tender selections and focus on tough, resilient plants in your landscape. Once you've chosen your plants wisely based on their ability to withstand our wild and erratic climate, you want to make sure that you plant those plants in an area where you're going to be able to water them forever. So you can water some very drought-tolerant plants as little as once per month, whereas a moderate water plant you might need to water regularly, say up to twice per week. So that's the range of water use that we have for landscape plants in this area. The most drought-tolerant options can be watered as little as once per month. A low water plant we would recommend watering, say, once per week, and a moderate water plant would be watered twice per week. Once those plants are installed and planted, you want to make sure that you cover any areas of soil with some sort of mulch. Now that can be bark mulch, it can be wood chips, it can be shredded wood, or it can even be gravel. But make sure that you cover that soil in between the plants so that you create a better rooting environment that will keep your plants healthy and thriving. Here are some characteristics of successful plants that work well here in the Pikes Peak region. As I mentioned, they need to have the ability to withstand drought, wind, and hail, because those are the weather events that will knock out the more fragile plants from your landscape. So when you're making an investment in purchasing plants, choose plants that can withstand those weather events. We also want to make sure that we're choosing plants that can come back every spring. So when we make that investment in planting, it's a long-lasting investment. And there are many perennial ground covers, ornamental grasses, flowers, etc., that will really come back every year and perform very, very well for you. We also want to make sure that we're choosing plants that require less water. Because we go into water restrictions periodically here in Colorado Springs, and we also get extended hot, dry periods, you want to make sure that you're choosing plants that can withstand periods of less water and come back from that. And there are lots of selections that fit that criteria. And then last, we want to make sure that we're choosing plants that have great ornamental value, particularly for our landscapes. And there are very tough plants that have beautiful flowers and texture and all sorts of ornamental characteristics that make them a great addition to your yard. All right, so what about deer? Deer can be a major challenge when it comes to selecting plants for your landscape. If you live on the west side of Colorado Springs, they can be quite a challenge. So if you have deer that are consistently browsing through your yard, you want to make sure that you're choosing deer-resistant plants. Now, there's no such thing as a deer-proof plant, but there are some plants that deer prefer to eat less than others. Some of those include ornamental grasses, as well as plants that have silver leaves or fuzzy leaves. Deer also do not prefer plants that have strong scents, like some of our herbs that can be used as landscape plants. There are some deer repellents that you can spray on your landscape plants that will provide temporary protection, but these often need to be reapplied throughout the summer to be effective. There are some strategies to discourage deer from spending long periods of time in your yard, but the only foolproof way to keep deer from eating your plants is to exclude them with fencing. And you'll need to check with your HOA to determine what type of fencing is allowed in your area. There are many different water-wise plants that perform really well here in the Pikes Peak region, and waterwiseplants.org is a great website that you can use to find those selections for yourself. At this website, we have an online plant database, which is hosted by Colorado Springs Utilities, and that's where you can find photographs and lots of information about the types of plants that we recommend. In addition, at this website, we have a landscape photo gallery where you can see some of these plants in the landscape setting to help you decide if they're going to be a good choice for your yard. At waterwiseplants.org, you can quickly filter the options that are available by using the filters on the left-hand side of the screen. And this can help you find the types of plants that are going to fit your interests and your lifestyle. If you're looking for deer-resistant plants, look for the heading that says wildlife and pollinators and click the checkbox for deer-resistant in that area, and that'll help narrow the options significantly for you. If you're looking for more of a short list, then I would recommend you take a look at our fact sheet that's called Water-Wise Plants for Your Landscape. Rather than giving you all the options of plants that you might want to consider like our website does, this instead gives you a short list of plants that have performed very well throughout the Colorado Springs area and use water wisely. So this can be a great option if you just want to get straight to the point and choose the best selections that are great performers in our area. We also have another fact sheet that features deer-resistant water-wise plants that you might want to also take a look at. Both of these are available at csu.org. So now let's talk about some tried and true plants that have proven to be great performers throughout the Colorado Springs area. The first plant that I want to talk to you about is called blue salvia. This is a flowering perennial, meaning that you plant individual plants in your landscape and they will come back year after year from the root system. Blue salvia is a very adaptable plant. It grows as a mound of attractive green leaves, and then in May it sends up these spikes of electric blue flowers, which are just very attractive. It's a very adaptable plant, so it will grow in most locations, whether that's a dry area or if it's a more moderate water garden. It's a good performer. And the nice thing about it is that the newer cultivars are very tidy in their appearance. Once those flower spikes have finished blooming, you can cut them off, and then you can oftentimes get a rebloom later in the summer with blue salvia. So if you're looking for a beautiful flower for your landscape, give this plant a consideration because it has been a good plant for the Colorado Springs area. Another plant that you might want to consider if you're looking for a flowering plant for your yard is catmint. This plant has lighter purple spikes of flower in May, so it has a very similar bloom time to blue salvia, but this plant is pretty bulletproof. It'll grow almost anywhere, and because the leaves have a strong scent, deer don't like to eat it and rabbits don't like it either. Now it will attract honeybees, so that can be an added benefit if you want to include nectar for pollinators in your yard. If you don't want honeybees visiting your yard, then you probably would not want to plant this particular plant. Here's a picture of an area of the Water-Wise demonstration garden where we have multiple catmint plants planted in a drift, and you can see how they just make a beautiful statement of flowers in late spring, early summer. So this is a good plant to consider for your yard as well. Another flowering perennial that you might want to consider is called moonshine yarrow. This is a very adaptable plant. Once again, it can do well in moist gardens as well as dry sites. And in the early spring, it'll start to grow as a mound of beautiful gray-green fern-like leaves. Beginning in June to July, it will send up these clusters of lemon yellow flowers, which are just such a beautiful surprise in midsummer. So rather than blooming in the early summer like many perennial flowers, this one blooms a little bit later in the summer when not a lot of things are blooming, so it can be a great addition. In this presentation, I'm going to be talking not only about flowers and shrubs, but I'm also going to be talking about what types of grasses you can use for lawns in Colorado Springs. By far the most common lawn grass in this area is Kentucky bluegrass. This is the traditional lawn grass for this area, and it's been used widely because it has very high traffic tolerance, meaning that dogs can play on it, kids can play on it, you can have different types of activities, and it can recover from that type of traffic very well. Kentucky bluegrass has a long green period from mid-April all the way through November. But it is something that is considered a high water use plant. So it has to be watered typically 3 times per week in midsummer, making it one of the higher water use plants in the Colorado Springs area. In order to keep your water bill reasonable, make sure you keep your Kentucky bluegrass lawn a reasonable size and irrigate it efficiently with high efficiency sprinklers and wise irrigation scheduling. Kentucky bluegrass can make a really good option for a backyard where you want a traditional lawn that's going to provide good traffic tolerance. Another option, specifically if you have a more shady site, you may want to consider tall fescue. It also has good traffic tolerance like Kentucky bluegrass, but is able to tolerate shade a little bit more. So if you have a significant number of mature trees in your yard, but you want a high traffic lawn, consider tall fescue. Once again, it has a very similar water requirement to Kentucky bluegrass. So in order to keep your water bill reasonable, keep the size of that lawn reasonable and irrigate it efficiently. Now that I've talked about some of the tried and true options for plant selection here in the Pikes Peak region, let's move on to some of the most drought tolerant plants. There are a large number of very, very drought tolerant water-wise plants that use significantly less water than the traditional landscape plants, and I want to share with you a few options that you may want to consider. The first thing I'm going to talk about is buffalo grass because it can be used as a replacement for a lawn grass here in the Colorado Springs area. Buffalo grass is a native grass that grows naturally here on the eastern plains, and you find it in areas where there's clay in the soil. So if you have a clay soil in your yard, buffalo grass can be a great option. If you have a very sandy soil, then I probably wouldn't recommend that you choose buffalo grass for a lawn. Buffalo grass is very short. It only grows to about 3 to 6 inches tall, which means that you don't have to mow as often. And it does have runners, as you can see in this photograph, which help it have some moderate traffic tolerance. Buffalo grass is this lawn in this particular photograph, and you can see that it has a lighter green color than a traditional lawn. It also has a shorter green period. It's green from mid-May to early October, unlike Kentucky bluegrass, which is green from April all the way to November. Now, that can seem like a disadvantage, but you also get some water savings by having a shorter irrigation season. If you want to reduce your mowing throughout the summer, buffalo grass might be a great option for you. Because it's so short, it only needs to be mowed 1 to 3 times throughout the summer. And as I mentioned, it can tolerate medium amounts of traffic, so it can be a good option for a front yard or an area where you don't have significant traffic that's continually occurring. Buffalo grass can be great for lawn areas, but it does require full sun. So if you have 8 hours of sun or more in your yard, it's certainly worth considering. If you have less than 8 hours of sun, buffalo grass isn't going to be a good choice for you because the grass will never thrive. It's never going to be thick and full. It will be thinner, and it's better to consider a different type of grass. There is significant water savings with buffalo grass. Unlike Kentucky bluegrass, where you need to water that 3 times per week in midsummer, you can water buffalo grass once per week or less and have a very good quality lawn. Buffalo grass performs well in the Colorado Springs area up to about 6,800 feet in elevation. If your home is located above 6,800 feet, I would recommend that you consider a different type of grass because buffalo grass just doesn't have a long enough growing season at high elevation to really enhance your yard. Another grass that I'd like to talk about is blue grama grass. This is a landscape that had a Kentucky bluegrass yard that was getting thin and not thriving very well, and it was converted into a yard where they used blue grama grass as the lawn area. Now you can see that it's a little bit longer than a traditional lawn grass, but it can be quite a nice addition. Just like buffalo grass, blue grama grass has a shorter green period from mid-May to early October. It is also a significant water saver, only requiring once per week irrigation or less. It is a low traffic tolerance grass, so I would recommend using it in the peripheral areas of your yard or a front yard. Blue grama grass performs best if it's left a little bit longer, so this can make a good option for a more naturalistic setting or a native type landscape. If you mow it too short, then it's very likely that it will get a lot of weeds growing in it. And this grass does require full sun just like buffalo grass. If you have 8 hours or more of sun, it's a good choice for you, and it's very adaptable to different types of soil. So if you have a very sandy soil, blue grama is a better choice than buffalo grass for your yard. In this photograph, you can see that blue grama grass was used as a lawn grass in this area, and it's really performing very well. And then in this photograph, you can see that blue grama grass is planted in this area to reduce the size of the traditional lawn. This area was kept in Kentucky bluegrass. So this turf reduction allows for some water savings because this has such a lower watering requirement than the traditional Kentucky bluegrass area. If you're looking for an alternative grass, but you have a lot of shade, then you may want to consider fine fescue. As I mentioned, in high shade environments, buffalo grass and blue grama are not good choices, but fine fescue, on the other hand, is probably the most shade tolerant grass that performs well in the Colorado Springs area. In addition, it works really well at high elevations, making it a good option for some of the higher areas of the Colorado Springs area. There is some limited water savings with the fine fescue lawn because you can water it twice per week rather than 3 times per week. Keep in mind that fine fescue is a low traffic tolerance grass, so it's going to work best in areas of your yard where you don't have consistent foot traffic. When I use the term fine fescue, I'm just referring to a group of very similar species of grasses that include hard fescue, sheep fescue, creeping red fescue, chewing fescue, and others. So if you want to plant a fine fescue lawn, you can buy seed of any of those individual species, or you can also buy what's called a fine fescue mix, which just includes the species of several different fine fescue grasses that all work really well together. So either option is a good choice. I talked about using blue grama grass as a lawn, but it can also be used as an ornamental grass. The cultivar that is most commonly found is called Blonde Ambition Blue Grama. And rather than using this as a lawn grass, you can plant it in individual plants and let it grow throughout the year to reach its full height. Throughout the growing season, Blonde Ambition Blue Grama has very fine, light bluish green leaves, and then in August it produces beautiful eyelash-like seed heads that are quite attractive. Blonde Ambition Blue Grama grass works very well throughout the Colorado Springs area, and it's adaptable to a wide variety of soils. Once blue grama reaches its full height with its seed heads, it can become a 3 foot by 3 foot mound, which is very attractive. Here are two photographs where you can see blonde ambition blue grama grass being used in the landscape. On the left-hand photo, you can see it here in combination with a beautiful boulder, some agastache, and tall blue rabbit brush. And this combination in late summer is just a really good option for a very drought-tolerant landscape. On the right-hand side, you can see blonde ambition blue grama grass planted in more of a drift with multiple plants, also with blue salvia and some Russian sage. So you can see how blonde ambition blue grama grass is a great combination plant to use with other flowering perennials and shrubs in the Colorado Springs area. If you're looking for a small, tidy looking shrub that is very drought tolerant, consider using baby blue rabbit brush. This is a very uniform shaped shrub that reaches 2 to 3 feet by 2 to 3 feet. It has feathery silver leaves throughout the growing season. In late summer, baby blue rabbit brush will produce beautiful yellow flowers, and it has very easy maintenance. So all you need to do to take care of this plant is to hedge it into a ball that's about 12 inches in diameter in early spring, say in March. Here's a photograph of baby blue rabbit brush just as the flowers are starting to open in late August. And then when those flowers are fully open, they are just a beautiful gold color. The flowers are really important to pollinators in the Pikes Peak region, so that can be another benefit of planting this plant in your landscape. Baby blue rabbit brush looks great throughout the year. In the fall, once the flowers dry out, they turn sort of a yellowish brown color, and they still are quite attractive as this dome shape. And then in the winter time, when we get beautiful snows, those flower clusters can trap the snow and make a beautiful white dome shape in your landscape. Now I'd like to move on to a shrub called Apache plume. This is a shrub that requires minimal water, meaning that you could water this once per month or less. It has a very western look with twisted, irregular branches, tiny green leaves. But this plant in May has beautiful white flowers that mature into pink fuzzy seed heads. So this plant is quite attractive for about 2 months during the growing season from May to June. So once again, if you're looking for an extremely drought tolerant plant that has beautiful flowers in the summer, definitely consider Apache plume as an option. Now that we've talked about drought-tolerant plants, let's move on to long-flowering plants. And by that I mean that plants that bloom over an extended period throughout the summer. The first plant that I'd like to tell you about is called red valerian. It's also known as Jupiter's beard in the industry. Red valerian is a beautiful flowering perennial that has clusters of reddish pink flowers from June all the way into September. Red valerian will continue to rebloom if you remove the faded flowers from the plant. This process is called deadheading, and when you do that, it stimulates this particular plant to continue to produce more flower clusters. So if you have limited space in your yard, or you want to have a special perennial that will flower throughout the year in an area of your yard where you spend a lot of time, red valerian can be a very good choice. Here's a close-up of the flower clusters, and you can see how that beautiful reddish pink color pairs well with silver-leaved plants and also yellow flowering plants as well. Another plant that I'd like to tell you about is called chocolate flower. This is a native plant to the southwestern US, and the flowers are a bright yellow color which open in the morning. When this plant is in bloom, it has a wonderfully attractive chocolate scent to them, which adds to the benefits of this plant. As I mentioned, it is native to the southwestern US, and it is a long flowering plant that will produce beautiful blossoms all the way throughout the summer. Another option to consider for a long flowering plant is Denver gold columbine. Many of us who have Colorado landscapes have a desire to include columbines in our yard. The native blue and white columbine that grows up in the mountains doesn't perform quite as well as we would all hope in our landscapes unless you have a very moist site. On the other hand, Denver Gold Columbine is a much more adaptable plant for landscapes. It has beautiful yellow flowers, and you can grow this plant in sunny locations that are hot and dry, as well as part shade locations, say under a small shade tree. It does produce, as I mentioned, these beautiful lemon yellow columbine flowers from May to June, and then it will rebloom later in the summer as well. And you can see how those columbine flowers really are gorgeous, having that inner part with a darker yellow flower and the exterior petals that are a little bit lighter yellow. This is a native plant to the southwestern portion of Colorado, and it makes a really good garden plant, especially if you'd like to have repeat bloom throughout in your yard throughout the summer. Now I'm going to share with you a few promising experimental plants that we've had really good luck with at the WaterWise demonstration garden. We test a wide variety of plants throughout the year, and these are some of the most promising options that have performed well for us. The first one is called Santa Fe phlox. This is a western wildflower that is quite small. It grows to be about 6 inches tall and about 12 to 15 inches wide as a mounding shape. But this plant is tough. It is very drought and heat tolerant. This is another long blooming plant. It does produce these beautiful pink flowers with the white eyes throughout the summer, so it's a good one if you need a small mounding plant in a ground cover area or at the front of a flower bed. It is a great option. It has a really tidy mound shape and can tolerate gravel as well as wood chip mulch. Here's another picture of Santa Fe phlox, and you can see how beautiful it is with catmint in the background and ruby muley over here as an ornamental grass. This is a close-up of the flowers of Santa Fe phlox, and you can see how beautiful they are with the pink petals and the white eye. This is a really good option for you if you're looking for a landscape plant for your yard. Another plant that I'd like to tell you about is called Windwalker Royal Red Salvia. This is a plant that is drought tolerant and has numerous spikes of large red flowers. The wonderful thing about this plant is that hummingbirds are really attracted to it. So if you want to bring hummingbirds to your yard, this is a great option for you. Now it will produce flower spikes throughout the summer, but you do need to trim off the faded flower spikes in order to encourage those new blossoms to grow. We've also found that Windwalker Royal Red Salvia can get quite large, maybe 4 to 5 feet. So if you pinch some of those branches back as they're developing in the spring, maybe when the plant is about 12 inches tall, you can help it keep a more compact shrubby form, which will support those flower spikes later in the summer. Here's a picture of about 5 plants of Windwalker Royal Red Salvia in our cactus garden. This area we water once per month or less depending on how much precipitation we get at the WaterWise demonstration garden. And you can see how these plants are just covered with really beautiful spikes of those deep red flowers. In an area where it gets hardly any water, it's much smaller in form. This is an area that we only water on demand if the plants start to wilt. And you can see that it's a more modest plant that's shorter in stature. Over here you can see this hummingbird really enjoying getting the nectar from this particular flower. So it can be a really beautiful addition to your yard. Here's an ornamental grass that you might want to consider for your yard. This is called Undaunted Ruby Muley Grass. It's this plant in this photo, and you can see how it creates a beautiful cloud of pink seed heads in late summer. This particular ornamental grass greens up early and loves heat, so it's a great option for a hot, dry area of your yard. As I mentioned, once it starts to produce its seed heads in late summer, it becomes this beautiful sphere of pink. And so far in the WaterWise demonstration garden, we have not had to divide this plant, which kind of reduces the maintenance requirements. Here's a picture of Undaunted Ruby Muley Grass in the early part of the growing season, and you can see how it is a really attractive mound of green leaves. This is where we have multiple plants. We have one here, one here, one here. It really is nice in this garden because it softens some of the spikier, more architectural plants with its soft green leaves and texture. Here's a picture of that ruby muley grass later in the summer when it starts to produce its seed heads, and you can see what a gorgeous pink drift of color it makes in this cactus garden. Here's that same area in the winter time, and you can see how the ruby muley grass, when it's dry, is really a nice light blonde color in the landscape. You can leave this ornamental grass up all winter and then cut it back in February to ground level. So this is a nice plant because it extends the season of interest in the landscape by looking really beautiful during the fall and winter months. Now let's talk about some low maintenance plants. I'm going to share with you some options for plants that only need to be maintained once throughout the growing season. There are lots of really low maintenance plants that can be used that are water-wise and attractive. One example is called blue wild indigo. Now this looks like a shrub because it will reach 3 to 4 feet in height and width, but it actually will die all the way back to ground level, making it a flowering perennial. In May into early June, it has beautiful deep blue, large spikes of flowers that are really attractive in the landscape. In the fall, the leaves will turn a yellow color, which extends its interest in the garden. Once these blue flowers start to age, they will create really attractive black seed pods. And once again, the maintenance on this plant is very easy. Just cut all the stems back to ground level in the spring. Here's a close-up of the blue flowers, and you can see that that deep color is really a wonderful addition to any yard. Here's an area where we planted wild blue indigo in the demonstration garden, and you can see how it has this vase-like form with these beautiful, attractive leaves that are a beautiful deep green. And once again, you would, in order to maintain this plant in February, you would just come in and cut all these stems back to ground level. This is an area where we have 4 or 5 different plants planted in a group. Here's a picture after this plant flowers. The black seed pods will develop, which are also very attractive and provide additional ornamental value. Another very water-wise, low-maintenance plant is lead plant. This plant requires minimal maintenance. You really only have to come back in February and trim off the old flower stalks. Otherwise, it does not need any pruning or shearing. This is a plant that is native to the eastern plains of Colorado, so it's very well adapted to our local climate. It has this very soft, beautiful gray compound leaf that has a fern-like texture. And then in July, lead plant will produce stunning purple flower spikes. And these individual flowers have bright orange stamens, which create this gorgeous color combination. Here's a close-up of those flowers as they start to bloom up the spike, and you can see how attractive they really are. This would be a great choice for a native type of garden or low maintenance landscape, or a very low water garden or plant bed in your yard. Here's a picture of a lead plant shrub surrounded by Mexican feathergrass, and you can see what a nice combination these two plants make together. Grow Low sumac makes a wonderful low maintenance shrub here in the Pikes Peak region. It's a spreading shrub, so if you have a large area of your yard that you need to fill up with a ground cover type shrub, Grow Low sumac is a great option. It can also be a good choice if you have a large hillside that you want to stabilize, because an individual plant will get maybe 24 inches tall, but maybe 8 to 10 feet wide. So you can really cover a lot of ground with a Grow Low sumac plant. It has beautiful glossy green leaves throughout the growing season, and then in the fall, those leaves turn a beautiful fiery red color, which can add additional color to your landscape in the fall. So I've shared with you a few specific examples of plants that thrive here in the Pikes Peak region. But believe me, there are so many more choices. So I want to share with you some resources that you can use to continue to learn about water-wise plants that perform very well here in Colorado Springs. First of all, you can visit our demonstration gardens for ideas. We have 2 water-wise demonstration gardens. The primary garden is located at 2855 Mesa Road, 80904, and that's where we have about 2 acres of displays where you can gain ideas and inspiration for your yard. At this garden, we have hundreds of different types of plants and cultivars that do really well here, and you can see them in their mature form. We have a second water-wise demonstration garden located at the Cottonwood Creek Rec Center at 3920 Dublin Boulevard. This is a smaller, lower maintenance garden, but it's much more accessible for those of you that live on the northeast side of town. So please feel free to visit these demonstration gardens. They're open during daylight hours every day of the year, and they're free and open to the public. As I mentioned, we do have our online plant database at waterwiseplants.org, where we showcase over 400 different types of plants that do really well here in the Pikes Peak region. As I mentioned, you can use filters to sort that list. You can also make your own favorites list and share it with other people. And you can also see photographs of local water-wise landscapes from our area. Last, I want to encourage you to continue to learn how-to steps from our webinars. We'll continue to offer additional webinars throughout the growing season, but please take advantage of those as well as the recordings of the webinars that we've already hosted this year. You can also access our fact sheets and videos at csu.org. Thanks for taking the time to learn about water-wise landscape plants and grass types. I hope this has been helpful to you, and good luck with your landscaping projects.